My name's Edward Ray. I write music predominantly for video games, but for several other forms of media as well. I've been working with Modular for about 2.5 years at this point. The experimental nature of it means that it invites you to implement a form of self-expression that I find you don't really see in other forms of music creation. I do really enjoy the non-committal aspects of it, so it's a lot less rigid, and it also brings its own limitations, and as a result of that you are encouraged to explore creativity in ways that you typically wouldn't if you were sat behind a digital audio workstation or, again, using a traditional instrument, so to speak. Yeah. That's a great question. You know, just the thought of having something tactile. You know, I use a lot of outboard gear as well because I find that with plugins you can get some great results, and with VSTIs, virtual instruments, you get some great results as well. But with Modular, it invites you to approach your workflow in a far different way, and you reach outcomes that you typically, well, not only typically, but I think that you couldn't reach when working with a keyboard and mouse. So that aspect of it drew me in as well. The non-committal nature of it as well, I think, was a really big draw for me. And plus all the fascinating stuff that's out there. It's a whole subculture unto itself that you can never know enough about Modular. There's always something new happening, or people doing things differently or using it in different ways. It's just a whole other dimension of music composition that people don't even really think about. Most people see it in the studio and don't even know what it is. So I kind of had the same thing. I'm still trying to figure out what it is in some ways. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it for me, yeah. So I do play other instruments aside from Modular. My first instruments as a kid, as a teen, were drums and guitar, and I started around the age of 15. And as time went on, I always maintained interest in music, was always busy writing songs, different genres over the years, collaborating with other musicians. Got into music production on the computer as well. And to me, the keyboard and mouse is almost an instrument in its own right, especially with orchestral composition as well. So. My first module was the plasma drive, the Erica synths and Game Changer audio crossover. That's what drew me into wanting to explore more modules. I wanted to buy the rack unit. I didn't really want it in the form of a guitar pedal because I wanted to use it as an outboard effect more, and you can use guitar pedals as outboard effects too, though I wanted it in like a rack, a dedicated space, so I could just use it again as an effects unit hooked up to the computer or what have you. And it started off as just the Moog grandmother and the plasma drive, just those two things, and they didn't actually work that well together, or at least I couldn't get them to work well at the time. But that was the first one, and then from there it was slippery slope, as I'm sure anyone who's into Modular will relate to. Yeah. What attracted me in Modular, one big aspect of it, was the gear acquisition syndrome that we're constantly trying to keep at bay. No, I'm being facetious. I think the sheer amount of innovation that's out there, the world of Modular is where you see the real innovations in music technology. I mean, you have companies that do the standard stuff, like make VCOs and VCAs and all mixers, all the like bog standard stuff, envelope generators, whatever. But I find that there's a lot more, as I say, I'll use the word again, innovation, people trying to do different things and do things in different ways. And not only that, but being able to modulate all these different parameters is another reason why, in the example of the Game Changer audio plasma drive, there wasn't that possibility to modulate like the drive level, the wet dry, the EQ. I mean, I know that there are ways to do it now, arguably, but just being able to modulate that level of control, but ironically also the limitations of it and the way those two intertwine is very unique, I feel, to this particular, if you like, subculture of music creation. So yeah, that's a big part of it. I always try and sneak it in a little bit, stubbornness maybe, but it's not a default go-to in that regard. When it comes to writing music for video games, a large part of the, if you like, the initial stage is to try to determine what the client is exactly looking for. What you want to find is the sound that's right for the project, and not just a sound that happens to fit the project, if that makes sense. That's when we'll start to dig into how we can represent that sonically. So part of what I do alongside writing music is also creating sound effects for video games. So I'll use it for sound design as well as for music composition. What I found is that I use it quite heavily for creating stingers. So a stinger would be like a loud noise that signifies a game event or introduces a transition between different intensity layers in a composition. For an ambient track, for example, you'd start on the modular, then you develop that and take the melodies and little snippets of ideas and then put them into a track where you might introduce some piano or VSTIs in the form of strings or guitar. So they definitely all work in harmony, yeah, or at least I try to make them work in harmony, yeah. But the way that I'll try to generate the ideas, I'll do it in a couple of ways predominantly, not always, but if I'm using it as a composition tool, for melodies, for example, I will tend to write the MIDI on the computer, and then I'll be able to patch it to different oscillators or voices, that sort of thing. So that's from a melody perspective. When it comes to generating ambient sounds, that will really depend. I've got a couple of modules here that have built-in sequencers that come in really useful for that. The Quadrantid Swarm, which is a really nice module, I really like that one. That works very well for that as well. It's got internal clock and everything, as most sequencers do naturally. But so that works really well for ambient stuff too, particularly when paired with magneto and that sort of thing. So when it comes to using the modular for composition, I'll use it quite heavily in ambient layers. So those moments in the game or in a game where a player is kind of exploring the map and you have some sonic textures in the background, that sort of thing. It works really well for that. And again, for stingers and that sort of thing, using filter sweeps by feeding sound effects out of the computer through this patch bay over here into that, and then obviously an audio signal, and then you'd feed it into a filter, VCF, distortion unit in some cases, the plasma drive again, or the plague bearer, those sorts of things. So use it heavily as a sound design tool as well as composition, right? Yeah. So modular certainly has had an influence over the way that I write music. It certainly has given me a different perspective in terms of the way that I write things, because it's taught me that sometimes a non-committal attitude is the way to go. Just experimentation for the sake of experimentation rather than feeling like you're running against a clock constantly. I think that aspect of it and being invited to not worry about, there are no mistakes with modular. And I think that that's what I really like about it. It just invites you to kind of turn a few knobs, make a few patches and see what happens. And that's really, I think that that's changed my perspective as a composer and musician for sure. And so it does feel a lot more fun in that regard, again, due to the lack of pressure in having to create something. I'm not assured that I'll get anything usable out of it, but the times that I do, it's something that I'm really excited about, more so than if I were to sit down behind the keyboard and just write something. I know that I can get a certain result, same story with the guitar, but with the modular, it's almost, because it's not guaranteed, it's all the more rewarding when it does happen. And that gives a bit of a perspective shift as well, I find. I've always had a passion for music, for sure, and the connotation behind it has changed majorly. I almost find that it's harder to write music for myself now, because I can feel inspired by something, but when you're surrounded by this amazing artwork and all this stuff that these people who are way smarter than me are making for the video games, then it's impossible to not feel inspired, right? As I say, there's so much inspiration around me constantly, and whether it's just having a conversation with a game developer at a networking event and seeing what they're working on, or to have the instructions like, we need this, here's the artwork, what would you think that would sound like? And so after the necessary discussion, you leave those conversations feeling very inspired, certainly, yeah. My favorite module, blimey, I would have to say it's most likely the Polyvox up here. For those that aren't aware, the Polyvox is an iconic Russian, I should say Soviet synthesizer. There is a full-fledged one over there, but this is the module version. Technically speaking, they shouldn't have called it a Polyvox because this has only got one oscillator in it, but all the same, it works wonderfully for bass lines, but you do lose a lot of that capability by losing one of the oscillators. But all the same, this was actually the second module that I got because I couldn't find an affordable Polyvox at the time, but I've used it extensively, more so than the fully fledged one because it's more stable, and also you can do all of the modulation with it. So definitely my favorite module. I'd say a close second, though I'm still yet to figure out entirely how it works, is the R-bar, the Instruo. I've not had enough time to really dig into it. As I was saying before, earlier on, they could write an encyclopedia about it and I could study that inside out and still probably learn something new every time I used it. But when I have managed to get something usable out of it, it's been incredible. Again, I do really love the quadranted swarm as well. I think that's a fantastic module, especially for the money. I think it's wonderful. What I would recommend is that people set their expectations appropriately and definitely don't do what I did, which is buy modules before you really know the ones that you have. It becomes a little bit like a home library in a sense, where you go through this phase of saying, I'm going to become a reader, and then you buy like 100 books at once, and then you never start even one because you just don't have the time or the inclination to do so. I would say pace yourself. Definitely get the biggest case that you can fit and find that you can fit in your living space and afford, but then take it slow. Get a few basics and staples down. Maths, for example, I think is a module that everyone should have. Get an oscillator, ADSR if you need one, depending on your oscillator. You can find a much more comprehensive and accurate list by just going on Modwiggler. But definitely take it slow and don't get too experimental too early on. If that's one thing that I could do differently, it would be to get a few basic staples and really learn them. But I definitely recommend it for all the reasons that I mentioned before. But I do think that approaching it in the right way would certainly be wise. Yeah, yeah. But for me, it means a lot of different voices where I can modulate cool stuff like the noise engineering stuff is really good for that, modulating the different voices to behave differently. Something that you can do it in Serum, for example, on your computer, but this is much more tactile, right? So for me, it means a lot of voices and a lot of different effects units. I don't have quite as many effects units as I'd like, but for what I need, this works very well at the moment, yeah. So I think I've got it for now, let's say, yeah. The ideal number of modules is the current number plus 1. A goal that I would really love to reach with Modular is being able to get to the stage where I can approach it the same way that I approach writing music on any other medium. Specifically, what I mean by that is if I sit down at the piano or with my guitar, and I have a very good idea of how to achieve a certain result that I have in my head. With Modular, I don't currently have that to the extent that I would like. And to be honest, maybe that's a good thing, come to think of it, because that's that explorative nature of it, right? But I think having an understanding, having a keen enough, a strong enough understanding to get more in the direction of where I think I'd like to end up, I think that would be like, for me, that would be the ultimate pinnacle of quote unquote success in Modular, yeah. That's a good thing to aspire to. Just having a stronger understanding in general would be a benefit, really, yeah, yeah. It's quite interesting. The way that people respond to the incorporation of Modular in the music a lot of the time is they're not quite sure what it is they're hearing, because I think a lot of people can identify a standard sine wave or saw wave synthesizer sound, but with Modular, because not everything, but because it's quite often modulated and run through different modules and the sound's manipulated in such a way, they can't quite place it. So they respond to the finished product. It was like, oh, I like that element in there. What is that? And I'll say, oh, it's a modular synth. They'll say, what's a modular synth? Then I'll show them and they'll think that I've got like a server room in the corner of the studio, or a server in the corner of the studio. So people don't quite know what to make of it a lot of the time, but the results are always, they're never boring, the results, at least to me. And people seem to be intrigued by it because they can't quite place what it is a lot of the time in what they're hearing. And there's a lot of intrigue about as to how it works, right? Because they say, okay, so how does it actually make sound? And I'll say, I have no idea. Just yeah. So trying to explain to them that obviously the different modules occupy different roles. It's basically, it's no different. Well, it's not so far removed from the other synthesizers over there or there. It's just there's no keyboard attached, and you have to feed it a signal either internally or from an external source with CV or MIDI to CV. But people quite often aren't sure what to make of it. So they've seen it, they've got a rough idea of what it is, but they have no clue what it does. And I'm the last person to explain it to them. So that's really good.